Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. This is the new 2024 Chevy Corvette E-Ray, and it's a hybrid Corvette with all-wheel drive. This is a totally different type of Corvette from every one that came before, but we live in a different era, and today I'm going to review the E-Ray. I'll show you all of its quirks and features, of course, but I'm also going to take it for a drive and review the driving experience. So let's go. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Corvette E-Ray, the hybrid Corvette, which sounds kind of lame, a hybrid Corvette, until you start looking at the numbers. The gas powertrain, 6.2-liter V8 with just under 500 horsepower, the same engine from the regular C8 Stingray. So right off the bat, it's a hybrid Corvette, but it starts with the same powertrain as the regular Corvette, so things can only be improved, and they are. You also have a lithium-ion battery pack and a front electric motor that drives the front wheels. The result is a total output of 655 horsepower and all-wheel drive for the very first time ever on a Corvette, and that of course means better traction off the line. And I'm not just saying that. Despite the hybrid powertrain, this isn't some ultra-environmentally focused, eco-friendly hybrid. Chevy calls it a performance hybrid, and that's exactly what it is. Couple items to note. For one, this is not a plug-in hybrid. You drive it like a Prius. You just put in fuel and then it charges the battery pack as you drive. So no plug-in. In fact, there's no real electric drive mode on this car. You can drive in fully electric stealth mode, they call it, for up to 4 miles. 4. So this isn't intended to be some electric car replacing the Corvette. And then there's the performance numbers that really prove this car's sporty focus over your traditional hybrid. 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, quarter mile in 10.5. In fact, Chevy says that this is the fastest accelerating Corvette of all time. More than the Z06, which they say does 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds, very conveniently. But regardless of that tenth of a second, this is obviously tremendously fast thanks to those all-wheel drive launches, the full torque from the front electric motor, and 655 horsepower in the whole system. And by the way, speaking of all-wheel drive, it's worth pointing out that Michelin Pilot Sport all-season tires are standard on this car, not the usual Pilot Sport summer tires. I guess they want this to be kind of a year-round Corvette with all-wheel drive and all-season tires. But if you just want to focus on performance, you're not going to be using the car in the winter, Pilot Sport 4S summer high-performance tires are also optional if you want to go that route. And a few more quick numbers before I dive into the quirks and features. One is weight. The hybrid system, the front motor, the battery pack, all-wheel drive, it all adds about 300 to 350 pounds, meaning that this car weighs about 3,900 pounds for the coupe, which is actually a convertible, and about 4,050 pounds for the convertible, which is also actually a convertible. As for pricing, the coupe starts around $104,000 including destination. The convertible is around $7,000 more at about $111,000. But maybe the most interesting number and the best proof that this car isn't an eco-focused, ultra-environmental hybrid, the fuel economy figures are the same between the regular C8 and the C8 E-Ray. There's no difference, probably due to the added weight, the all-wheel drive system, and the extra power. So your hybrid Corvette doesn't actually get better mileage, it only gets better performance and better grip. But anyway, next up, moving on to those quirks and features, starting on the outside with the body. The E-Ray has the same body, the exterior design, as the Z06, which means it gets the wide body. And you can tell instantly unfortunately, on looking at this car, it is wider than your standard C8, about 3.5 inches wider with this body shared with the Z06. Make this car look more muscular and aggressive compared to a standard C8. Now, with that said, at the rear end, you have the standard C8 exhaust situation. This is just from the regular Corvette. It's not changed to upgrade to the Z06. So you have the Z06 wide body, but the regular C8 rear end exhaust, and of course powertrain. But there are a few other upgrades to the E-Ray on the outside. One is the wheels, which are different on the E-Ray, and in my opinion, gorgeous. I think these wheels look so cool. These thin chrome 5-spokes really add to the exotic look, almost Ferrari-like. The E-Ray also comes standard with carbon ceramic brakes, which is optional on the regular C8 Corvette, standard here for the added performance. And of course, the E-Ray has some E-Ray badging on the outside. You can see it here on the rear fender where the Z06 badge would be on, well, the Z06 says E-Ray, but that's about it in terms of exterior changes over the regular Corvette. It seems to me Chevy didn't want to go all out publicizing that this is the hybrid Corvette. They wanted to leave those changes under the skin, but keep the ownership experience, the look, relatively similar to other Corvette models from a driving and owning perspective. But anyway, next we move inside the E-Ray, or at least we unlock the door with the key, which is the same key you get in the standard Corvette. No real difference here. As you can see, Corvette logo on one side and a lot of buttons on the other side for many different things that you can do. Now, when you go to climb in the car, you'll notice there's no immediately obvious door handle on the door. It's under here, this strake for the intake. You reach under here, press a button, it electronically pops open the door, and then you climb inside. In here, it is largely familiar if you've spent any time in the new C8 Corvette. No major changes to the E-Ray, but there are a few upgrades and updates that people will notice. For one, E-Ray on the door sill instead of Stingray or Z06. You also have E-Ray at the base of the steering wheel, as you can see, and eagle-eyed C8 people will notice the addition of these two buttons here on the side of the center tunnel. One of them is for auto start stop, that feature that automatically shuts off the car at a stoplight to save fuel. The E-Ray is the very first Corvette model with this feature, and if you don't like it, you can just turn it off by pressing that button. Next to the auto start stop button is a button that activates a drive mode that Chevy calls Charge Plus. They say that this is the best mode you want to be in if you're doing racetrack driving, because it essentially charges the battery extra as you drive along to make sure that you get full performance from the hybrid system. And so you go into Charge Plus, it gives you more performance for a longer period of time, keeps that battery charged to give you your full acceleration. The other difference with the E-Ray compared to the standard C8 is something you don't immediately notice in here until you put your foot on the brake. With the car off, you do that, and some selections appear on the gauge cluster screen. This is how you switch into stealth mode. So you can twist the drive mode dial and go from regular to stealth mode, and if you select stealth mode when you start up the car, the engine won't turn on and be loud. Chevy tells me this, again, only good for 4 miles and speeds up to 45 miles an hour. But the thinking is you turn this on if it's like a quiet morning, you're going to Cars and Coffee, you don't want to wake up your neighbors, you start off in electric mode and then the gas engine kicks in later when you're away from your neighborhood. So beyond those E-Ray changes in this interior, let's talk through some other C8 Corvette quirks, which are, well, numerous. One is the gear selector, which is very unusual. You can see park is a button, reverse is like a switch that you lift up, neutral is another button, and drive is another switch. And below all that, there's an M button, which allows you to shift gears manually. Certainly unorthodox compared with most gear selectors. Now, next to that, you have this little hill in the center console, and it says mode on top. Under that is your drive mode dial. You can move it left and right to select your various different drive modes, sport and tour, and also a my mode, which you yourself can configure. Another interesting item in the center control stack. But the most unusual and interesting item in here is unquestionably the climate controls. This long vertical strip of climate controls going all the way from the dashboard basically to the seat back. It's certainly a distinctive element of the C8. The upper controls are for the driver, the lower controls are for the passenger, and the ones in the middle are shared controls like where the air comes out, the fan speed, that type of thing, all along this unusual line in the center. Now, it's worth pointing out also in the center, specifically specifically of the E-Ray, the battery is in here. It's mounted here in the center tunnel between driver and passenger. These batteries tend to be pretty heavy, so sticking it here, kind of the middle of the car, is a good placement for it if you want to neutralize the impact on this car's handling. Now, also worth pointing out in the center console here is this lid, this panel. You press it and it pops open and reveals cup holders. Behind that, there's another panel that's an armrest, but you can open up and it reveals storage or plug-in for devices. And above that, between the seat backs, you have another storage compartment, although this one is actually a wireless phone charger. It's a pretty cool placement for it since there's not really room in the center console, but you still have that feature in the C8 between the seats. You can also see here in between the seats, there's another E-Ray badge, another little distinctive touch compared to the standard Corvette. Other interesting quirks in this interior, for one thing, the steering wheel is not actually a wheel. It's flat on top, flat on bottom, and kind of an overall hexagon shape, like a lot of performance car steering wheels. It's not perfectly circular. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of buttons on the steering wheel, a lot of driver-focused controls, but my very favorite button is this one that says Z. It's just a Z, and that is a high performance mode. You press it and the Z lights up, which is actually a pretty cool little touch, but it also tightens up your throttle response, your suspension, your transmission shifting. It gives you like the sportiest of sport modes. So even after you switch into sport mode with the dial in the center, you can still go further than that with Z mode and this button on the steering wheel. Now, steering wheel controls over on the right side adjust what you see in your gauge cluster screen display, although it's worth pointing out you can't really control all that much. Only this little component to the right side of this gauge screen doesn't really give you a lot of configurability. There's no full screen map or full screen anything in here really, which is kind of a shame. The whole point of a gauge cluster screen instead of analog controls is more configurability, but you don't really get that here. However, you do get a fantastic infotainment system in the center. It's not a huge screen, but this isn't a huge interior. A giant screen would look weird. You do have great responsiveness when you tap and touch and move, and it's really intuitive, really easy to figure out, to use, to understand, and frankly, it's a good infotainment system. Very usable, no complaints or drawbacks here, except for the smaller size, which I think fits this car's interior. Surprisingly nice. And a surprisingly good camera system in here too, rear and front, which is really good because obviously visibility in a tight, low sports car isn't always the best. Well, here you can see stuff you can't see with your eyes. Also worth pointing out, on the screen there's a new E menu when you tap on that, and it shows you like various electric system components in real time. You can see exactly how much power you're making from the electric portion of the car. You can see that in real time, or you can use this dyno to show within the last 15 seconds how much power you've been making. It's all pretty cool, a nice little performance addition to the hybrid. And other interesting items in this interior, one is the rear view mirror, which you can see is a, well, rear view mirror, nothing unusual there. But if you flip this switch at the bottom, it becomes a camera, which is a fantastic feature. More and more automakers are adding this, a camera rear view mirror, but it's especially helpful on a car like this, where visibility isn't necessarily a strong suit. And as for getting out, there's no traditional door handle in here. Just like several previous Corvette models, the door release is a button. You push right here and it electronically pops open so you can climb out. No boring door handles for you. But just in case you're worried your popper will break or your battery will die and you're stuck in your Corvette, there is a manual release on the floor, as you can see, so you can still mechanically open up the door if it comes to that. Also interesting in this interior, like I mentioned, this is the coupe E-Ray model, but it's still a convertible because this roof, this Targa top, comes off, and when it does, you have actually about the same convertible feel as you do in the regular C8 convertible. The difference being, in the regular convertible, you push a button, the top goes down. Here, you gotta physically remove the top. It's not as easy, but you can store it in the car. When the top's off, it fits inside the trunk, so you can drive around with your roof, even if it's off. And speaking of the trunk, you can open the rear trunk in a few ways, but one of them is on the key fob. One of those many buttons has a car with the trunk open and says X2, so you push it twice and then the trunk pops open and you can open it up from here. Now, as you can see, and as you may have seen earlier, the trunk in back is shared with the engine, which is actually pretty cool. Every time you want to go get your stuff out of the car, you also see the engine, which looks awesome, as you can see. But it's also important to point out that the rear trunk in this car is actually pretty decent size. Spans basically the whole width. Like I said, it can fit the roof, and it's pretty good sized if you want to carry luggage in your C8 Corvette. It's not quite as impractical as you might think. But the rear trunk is not the only cargo area in the C8. You also have this front trunk, which, as you can see, is fairly decent size. Not as big as the one in back, but some extra storage space up here, and especially useful if you want to have your roof off, and in the rear trunk, you still have more storage in the front trunk. Now, one thing especially worth noting, despite the hybrid components and the front electric motor, this front trunk is about the same size as the one you get in a standard C8. Chevy says you lose about 1 cubic foot of cargo space, which is really not all that significant. So the packaging up here is pretty good. You have all the hybrid stuff, but it still allows you to retain this front storage compartment. And by the way, one cool thing about this front compartment, again, you can open it several ways, including the key fob, but there's also a hidden front trunk button on the outside of the car. It's under the headlight. You can see right here this little rubber button. You press it and the trunk can pop open and you can get inside. Most people would never even know it's there. And one other cool Corvette quirk on the outside, the taillights, and more specifically, the turn signals. I've always loved in the C8 Corvette how they sweep across. It's becoming a new fad, these sweeping turn signals, and they look cool here. The whole thing lights up and then it sweeps off, and it's just a nice little touch that adds a little more visual flair to this already pretty dramatic car. All right, driving the C8 Corvette E-Ray. I've been pretty excited about this car, an all-wheel drive hybrid Corvette. In your mind, that doesn't sound particularly appealing, but the numbers on paper are pretty impressive. And it's kind of hard to ignore, 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. I mean, it's absurd. So let's talk E-Ray. First off, driving it around. It is interesting, the sounds that it makes. So you hear the traditional V8, which I think probably pretty well comes across on camera. But then you hear like this electric motor sort of in parallel with that, which is weird. I mean, this is an unusual thing. It's not a plug-in hybrid, so you can't really drive it on full electric power. And it's, it's like a Prius, but a V8 Prius in terms of the sound. And so you hear the from the electric motor simultaneously with the rumble from the V8, which is, in my opinion, kind of cool. It almost feels like you're at this middle ground between the past and the future, which I guess you are. So let's take a stab at the throttle here. Wow, it's really fast. And when you really get up there, you hear even more of that electric motor. I'm not sure how well that came across on camera because it's pretty brief, but wow. Now, I didn't even launch it from 0 to do that pull, and it feels really fast. Now, I already think the regular C8 is fast, but this is clearly noticeably faster than the regular C8. I kind of was wondering, like, without the Z06, like, ride harshness and bigger engine and the sound, is it really gonna feel that much faster? The answer is, yeah, it is quite a bit faster. It feels quite a bit faster. And it's impressive. But one interesting thing, sitting at a stoplight like I just was, like, it's calm. The Z06 is a harsh car, and this doesn't really feel like that. And now kind of driving it more in tour mode, just sort of cruising around, it just feels like a nice, relatively comfortable car. I mean, it's still a sports car, so the ride is still harsher than you would get in, a nice luxury car at this price point, or even like a nice mid-size sedan, whatever. But a sports car that does 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds in today's world is one of the fastest sports cars in existence. And this doesn't feel like that when you drive it around. Usually those are exotic cars that are insane and crashy and difficult and hard to operate and blah, blah, blah. But this actually feels, pretty reasonable. And I think that's the cool compromise of the E-Ray. Here's a car that has all-season tires and all-wheel drive that you can drive all the time. It gets the same fuel economy as the regular Stingray, 18 miles combined. That's really not so bad for a car like this. But it has the performance of the Z06 in terms of straight line acceleration thanks to this hybrid powertrain. It's kind of a best of all worlds thing. It's not going to be the car for people who want like an uncompromised sports car experience. That's the Z06 and presumably the upcoming ZR1 or whatever they end up calling it. And it's also not like the affordable one. I mean, the regular C8 is still a lot cheaper than this and provides similar thrills. But if you want kind of the all-around package, this car does it in a pretty impressive way. And I gotta say, you don't really notice the weight. I'm not sure if that's because a lot of it is up front, and so it helps to actually balance the car a little bit more since there's, you know, so much weight in back with the engine. Either way, I don't really notice it. The front end doesn't feel unusually heavy or really heavy at all. I mean, this car is quick, it accelerates fast, it still makes all the right noises because it still has the same great V8, but it's faster than before, and it obviously adds a little bit of extra practicality. It's a neat way that Chevy has gone, basically, doing this E-Ray to kind of bring people into what is inevitably the future of these cars, which is electrification. Here's like the start. It's like dipping your toe in the pool of electrification. And it's fun to drive and fun to use, and it's fast, and it's exciting, and it's cool. And whether you prefer it to a standard C8 Corvette will obviously be something for, you know, you to decide whether it's worth the extra money. But I think there will be people who kind of want a lot of the performance without sacrificing ride quality in the Z06 while still getting the all-wheel drive. And this car offers that without really making you make any compromises except a slightly higher price point. And so that's the new 2024 Chevy Corvette E-Ray. This is a new Corvette for a new age. And while you may associate hybrid with boring, this certainly isn't that. And now it's time to give the E-Ray a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 64 out of 100, which places the E-Ray here against some rivals. The E-Ray is an awesome car with amazing performance, but it has a bit of a strange role. It's fast like the Z06, but more of a cruiser like the regular C8, yet quite a bit more expensive than the standard C8. I think most people who want a C8 will just save their money and keep buying the regular one. It's fast enough, while the E-Ray isn't brawny enough to steal sales from the Z06, but it does present an interesting option for people who want a cruiser that can also smoke hypercars at a stoplight.